Hey everybody, welcome back to Frigid North. Today we've got a 2013 VW CC R-Line with a 2.0 liter TSI engine. It was brought in for a coolant leak to the exterior. That leak was found to be coming from the pipe that goes into the coolant pump, from the heater hoses that ties into that big thing, and then it goes into the reservoir, and then it goes into the other lower heater hose. I mean, it's just everywhere. So it's a big mess, spaghetti mess under there. We got that patched up, got it fixed. However, in the meantime, pulling the air charge cooler pipe off, because it's a turbo engine. When I pulled that pipe off to access the coolant pipe, oil that was mixed in with water came running out of that pipe, and it was just, I mean, so much that it dumped all over my arm. You can see the stain, maybe you can't. Definitely right here too. So it pooped all over me. Typically you'll find some oil in these air charge coolers, just because turbos tend to leak some oil here and there, and so sure enough, but this was a lot of oil mixed in with water. And so where's the water coming from? Well, it's hard to say just at this moment. Could be leaking through the turbo, could be leaking from the oil cooler, could be a head gasket. I did pull a dipstick, and there was a little bit of a trace of that diarrhea looking oil in there, just a smidge though. We're gonna fill up our coolant system using the air charge cooler. Sorry, not the air charge cooler. We're gonna fill up our cooling system using the airlift system. This is a device that hooks onto your reservoir, and you hook an air line to it, and then you run this hose into a bucket, and you open this valve, and it'll expel the air from the system and completely evaporate, or not evaporate, but it completely deplete the system of air. And then when it's sucked down into the vacuum range of, you want to be in the green here. So typically I get them down to, in our area, I get them down to 26, 27 inches of mercury, and vacuum. I get it down to the vacuum. So I shut it off, and then I just let it sit and see if that gauge rises. If it rises, then I know I've got a big leak. If it doesn't, then we move on. So the first thing that we need one of these fancy adapters. You can use a type that's just a universal fit. It's just a big rubber cone. You shove it in there as tight as you can, and then pull your vacuum, and hopefully it stays. Generally they work, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they can be a real pain. So if you can pony the dough, these are better to have. These are actually screw-on. They're custom fit for the vehicle, and just because it's just made for this vehicle doesn't mean it won't work for others. So, which is good, because these things can be upwards of $100 or so. So it's nice to have. And this one is designed for these European cars, where it has the external threads versus the internal. So I'll get that screwed on there. Nice and tight. Don't have to crank it down with a wrench, just hand tight. Then you take the tool, throw it on there. Make sure it's good to go. And like I said, I take a, where'd it go? What did I do? I just had that thing. I am king at setting something down and losing it. My head wasn't screwed on, I lose it too, right? All right, so we're gonna close that valve for now. So, and now this will drop down into our bucket, and we're good to go there. So what's nice about these systems is that, especially on these engines that, this one not in particular, but some engines sit lower than the radiator, and so it's really difficult to get the air out. And so these are a great invention, and I'm glad they're around, because they used to be a real pain to get the air out of them. Turn my air compressor on. I turned the air compressor off because this is our house, and our shop is attached to the house. So if there's a slight leak down in the compressor, which a lot of times there is, then it'll kick on in the middle of the night, wake us up, and that's no fun. Makes for a groggy morning. Causes us to drink extra coffee. All right, so hook up our air hose. And then I go ahead and open up the line that's going to go into our evacuation bucket. And this bucket, nothing's really going to flow into here, but there will be some residual. Good. And we've been in the green for a few minutes now. And so we're going to go ahead and turn off the air supply and then let the system sit and see what it does. Now we're going to watch this gauge and make sure it doesn't rise up on us. Right now we're sitting at little less than 26 and a half, and it's holding. And if you had a hose up here that you could see, which you can't because it's kind of buried, you would see that upper hose collapse down. That's because it's got a vacuum in it. And so we're going to sit here and watch this for a few minutes. There's multiple checks that we do, or multiple steps that we do with the cooling system. And there winds up being multiple checks at the same time because it's all kind of hand in hand. First thing we do is we apply vacuum to it and then hold that vacuum for a certain amount of time, 5-10 minutes, and see what the gauge does. If it holds steady, then we are going to move on. We're going to go ahead and fill up the system, and then we'll apply a pressure tester to it and pressurize the system up to the manufacturer's specs, which in this case is 16. Oh, doesn't say on there. I have to look up in the service information. Rough, I would say 16-ish is where it's going to be at. And then, so we'll pressurize it to that amount. We'll hold it for another 5 or 10 minutes. We'll inspect the system, see if it's leaking down anywhere. We'll watch the gauge on that tester and see if it drops. See, on the vacuum, you want to check to see if your gauge rises. On the pressure tester, you want to see if your gauge drops. Either one of those will tell you that you have a leak somewhere. So say it passes the pressure test, then we're going to remove that, and then we're going to cap it off, and then we are going to run the engine for a few minutes and then get to operating temperature and then check for any external leaks. Everything's good. We're going to go ahead and road test it, and then you bring it back. And this is a specialized case, though. We have 2 problems going on with this thing, potentially. One was it had an external leak to begin with, which is why it was here. And so we're going to verify that that leak is repaired. However, like I said earlier, there was water mixed in with oil in the air charge cooler pipe, which dumped all over my arm when I took that off. And so we potentially have another problem too. And so we're not going to go for our standard road test right off the bat. We're going to change up our protocol for this situation. And we're going to run the engine for a couple minutes, get that oil churned up. And if there's any water in there, it's going to mix up real well. And then we'll pull a dipstick and see if it's all brown, goopy, diarrhea looking stuff. And if you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. You've opened those diapers and that's exactly what it'll look like, that brown running, goopy, bleh. I had that on my arm last night, nasty. And fortunately it didn't smell as bad because it wasn't from a human, it was from just the engine here. But anyway, so we're gonna do that. So we'll run it for a couple minutes, shut it down, check the oil level, see the condition of that oil and see if we have another problem that we need to address. If not, we'll move on and do our road test, bring it back. Now, the case with this originally was that it had a cold water leak. So it never leaked when it was under pressure. So after they drove it around, it didn't leak. It didn't leak while they were driving. It didn't leak when it was sitting, when it was hot. It only leaked when the engine had sat and got cold and sat for a period of time. That's a cold water leak. And that's when it leaked on this one. So we'll bring it back, check for external leaks when it's hot, verify that's not a problem, and then we're gonna park it outside and overnight and check it in the morning. And then we'll check that right before we go to church, and then we'll see where it's at. So for the time being, we're still holding good vacuum. We're going to go ahead and charge up the system. And the way we do that, like I mentioned before, is we have our bucket right here. And this has enough coolant that to cover the amount that came out. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. So the way I do it is I ensure that my pickup screen is underneath the level of the coolant. And then I crack the line open and I let the coolant come through and get to here. And then I stop, I shut it off, and then I apply the air pressure again, or the air line again to it. And then I pull just 30 seconds of vacuum, just to kind of get any air that may have gotten in there, because there's air in this tube. So we're gonna do that just enough to expel the air that got in there. So open the tube, shut it down. Now we filled our tube. The air that was in here is now in our system. Now granted, it's not very much, but we're gonna expel it anyway. So we're gonna let this run for 30 seconds or so. And as you can see, our gauge didn't really go up at all, so it's not like we lost a ton of vacuum. But just for my peace of mind, that's what I do. And a lot of times with these instructions, they say to do that anyway, so it's not a bad idea to do it. All right, so that should be good enough. And now we are going to open this up. And now our coolant is flowing from the bucket into the cooling system. And this is nice because now we don't have to fill it up, run the engine, let it get hot, let it burp, and then top it off. This takes care of everything all at once because it creates vacuum on both sides of the thermostat, and it'll pull the coolant into both sides of that thermostat. So that's the benefit of this system. And again, you want to be sure that your inlet is not going to come out of the coolant, because then you're going to suck air and you're losing all your vacuum. So we are completely full. Like I said, we didn't lose a ton out of this, and so we're already full. So let's go ahead and get rid of our air line. Open that. So now we get rid of our filler. Okay. So now if you're in an instance where you do overfill a little bit, it's not the end of the world. You can just get yourself most shops will have a fluid extractor. You can just use that, which is what we're going to use. And that'll evacuate it out so you can get it down to the proper level. Or you can just use a turkey baster, right? Don't use your wife's. I just so happen to have one right here. Now, this is not what I'm going to use. I'm just going to do it a couple times to show you. But see, you can just do that. Now I'm not going to put this back in my clean bucket because, what has been in here, I don't want that mixing with my coolant. Now you apply a vacuum, suck it out, and then you shouldn't have anything running back in there, so it's safe to do that. In any case, this is what you can use. It works, it just takes some time. So I'm going to go ahead and use the extractor because it's faster, and we've got to get this car going. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So what you do here is you hook the air line up to this fitting here, open the valve, and then fluid, you stick that into the fluid, whatever you want to suck out, and it'll bring it out. So that's what we're going to do. And this doesn't matter what fluid goes in here, just know that whatever's in here is going to be contaminated because you use it for multiple things, like you see. You don't want to reuse whatever is in here. Take it down to just above the maximum, because that will allow the coolant to expand, as well as if there's any minuscule of air in there, it'll burp it out and it'll drop it down just a hair. So 9 times out of 10, there's no problem with that at all. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and pressure test. And again, use the adapter that you used before. Now there's different variations of these testers. Some are the old-fashioned hand pump. You hook it up to your system, and then you just pump it, you know, by hand. And those were used for years and years and years. By the end of your career, you got big old muscles. Anyway, nowadays, because we get fat and lazy, we like these, where we don't have to hand pump anymore. We use the air from our shop compressor to apply the air. And so that is very handy. But it's also very handy for another reason. If you have a leak and you're not sure where it is, well, say we pulled the vacuum and our gauge rose. Where's our leak? We can't see it because it's not going to push anything out because it's losing the vacuum. There's nothing in it, or very little in it. And so we don't know where that leak's going to be because we don't have pressure applied, we have a vacuum applied. And so this is handy. By applying the air, we can have that air constantly apply. And then we can listen, or we can spray with soapy water and see where the air is coming out. And that is very handy with these. So I have both. So if this fails, I have the backup. Okay. So with this one, we just hang it up on the hood. I close the valve to start. I close the valve and then open it all the way, or loosen it all the way. That way there's no air pressure applying to it. Now I need to go and check what the pressure requirement is for this before we add any pressure to it. We want to check, like I said. They say 14.5 PSI. And so, or in German terms, 1 bar. And so, how they come up with that bar stuff, I don't know. Anyway, that's what they want. So we're gonna pressure it up to 14 PSI. Valve is closed. Regulators all the way shut. And slowly open this up, just in case you have a problem with your regulator. That way you don't just boom, automatically just, you know, charge your cooling system with 110 PSI or 120 PSI, and, or in this case, you know, 150, 160 PSI. So now we go ahead and slowly open up our regulator and apply, and do this slowly. Don't ramp it up. You don't want to shock it. And we're going to increase it to about 14 PSI. And watch it, watch it, watch it. Now you can walk away, but you want to be careful of that, because if you have a pressure clamp for some reason, like for some reason you have a wacky regulator, and you come back and this thing's at 35 or more, you know, then you got a problem, and now you can potentially cause some engine damage inside that you don't want to have to deal with. So we're going to leave this at 14, and we're going to sit here and watch it and make sure that we're good. And while we're keeping an eye on it, we're going to look for leaks and see if anything is leaking down, specifically where we did our repair. And so we'll go from there. Now later on, if we get to the point where we determine water is entering the oil pan somehow, we're going to apply this pressure and pull spark plugs out, look down on the cylinders with a bore scope, and see if we see coolant leaking into them. Okay, we held our pressure for several minutes, and we don't see any problems right off the bat. So we're going to go ahead and run the engine like we talked about for a couple minutes, turn up that oil, and then check the dipstick and see what we see in there. And hopefully we don't see any problems in there. Boy, that's a loud evap purge valve. You hear it clicking? Reminds me of the purge valve sold by a certain manufacturer or a certain store here in town. Aftermarket, of course. Replaced it on a Ford Explorer 3.7 liter, and the Motorcraft one is quiet as can be. Put the aftermarket on it. Tick, 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 tick. It sounds like you got a loose lifter. Sure enough, it was the purge valve just ticking away, just like this one. I don't know if you can hear it or not. Sure enough, purge valve just ticking away. And I don't know if that's an aftermarket one or if that's the OEM. No check engine lights on, so that's good. Now remember, we had a bunch of oil and water in the CAC tube, the charge air cooler tube, and so we want to be sure that there's nothing in our crankcase. Nope, it's black, so that's good. No diarrhea. So it's either we got a problem with coolant passing through the turbo, or maybe it's just condensation got in there somehow and is mixing with oil that is leaking past the turbo. I don't foresee any problems here. Let's pull the cap. See what we see there. I don't see any diarrhea, so that's good. This engine, I don't believe we have a problem with coolant entering the crankcase because it is black. So that may have just been some moisture that was in there, and sometimes that'll happen. Especially if you get a car that's being short tripped, you get condensation built up. But there's nothing on the bottom of the cap. There's nothing inside the valve, under the valve train. Nothing mixing in with oil, so we're good there. So, all right, we're gonna go road test this, and then we'll get back, we'll check it for leaks, and if everything's good, then we're going to let it sit. We're gonna go ahead and let it sit overnight because I wanna make sure that cold leak is not there. And then we'll turn it loose tomorrow. All right, check. I guess even scooters have the right of way.